everyone to the Kahua Build Different podcast, episode 5 today. Happy to be talking again about efficiency. Really, the focus of our topic today will be about breaking down those communication barriers that prohibit efficiency. We'll talk about how we can improve collaboration across teams and the role that automation and data integration might take in this. So, very happy to be joined by two incredible guests today. I'm Nicholas Johnson. I'm the Chief Evangelist at Kahua. Glad to be with you today. My friends Rob and Manny are with me. I'm going to ask them each to introduce themselves. Tell us a little bit about what you do currently, what your background is, and what your passions are. Manny, can we start with you?
Sure, I'm Manny Namorato. I am retired from the city of New York and from government service in general. I did 34 years, and I'm currently a consultant around construction and other technology in general. Now, this has been great to be able to sort of continue working in the industry in a different focus, really working with other leaders to help them as they face a lot of the challenges that I faced when I was running sort of an IT department. And, I like going on cruises, as I did a couple of weeks ago, and I enjoy spending time with my family.
Excellent. Well, welcome, Manny. Glad you're here again with us today. Rob?
Hey, Nicholas. Good to be here today. Appreciate the invitation to kind of hang out. For people that haven't heard my name before or seen my face somewhere, I have been in the construction space over 20 years. I was actually safety director back in the day for 15 years. I've always loved and had an affinity for technology. So I moved over in 2015 and have worked through a few different companies, still trying to serve the construction industry. Safety is still kind of my focus. So I work currently for a company called Salus, which is a construction safety technology out of Vancouver, Canada. I am what they call their construction safety advocate. So I go around and deliver presentations about technology, about how safety can help. I'm really fascinated right now about what AI can do for safety. And again, it's, trying to move the industry forward, trying to shift that focus and have conversations like this and just keep talking about what can technology really do to improve and make a positive impact on the construction industry.
Well, Rob, I doubt there's many people that listen to our podcast that haven't heard your name. So we're really glad you're with us today. Thanks for being a part. I'm going to go back to that basic premise that good tech can enable better communication and thus enable collaboration, and that better communication of data and the automation of its delivery will lead to better and faster decision making. So first, I assume that you guys agree with the premise. If not, I'm in big trouble today. I don't know why we invited you to be on, but assuming that you agree with this premise, would you just share kind of your highest level thoughts on the topic? Manny, I'll start with you.
Sure. Right. So I've been watching this evolve over in the construction side over probably 15 years now, and just watching as we went along and captured more and more data and made that data more available and took it out of its silos, right, and spread it out. And what we've watched is improvement in the way things are designed, improvement in the way that changes to those designs are communicated back to the folks who are actually building, so that we're constantly working with the latest improvements in the area of cost control and financials, so that the folks who are funding these projects really have a handle on what's happening with them. And the reason that really is important from an owner's perspective is you have a certain amount of money that you're going to spend, and it allows you, if you know that projects are proceeding well in terms of financials, it allows you to then come up with the next set of projects because it tells you how much money you're sort of going to have still in the pot. And it's a lot better. It makes for much more efficient planning, capital planning, right?
Rob, your highest level thoughts.
I'll come at it from the field side, right? From the general contractor and the trades. For them, what I've honestly seen is this very rough transition from paper, which has ruled this industry for how many thousands of years, right? Like we've been drawing on walls and then paper. And there's some of us that can still remember what blueprints look like, actual real blueprints. It's this instant access to documentation on job sites. So I came into business in 2001. There was still a lot of paper. That was still the early stages of Excel into this industry. I remember being on job sites I think I started and the company had 15 superintendents and one had a computer in 2001. One.
Wow.
Now we go to 2025, right? This has been a whip speed, a crazy adoption. So, from the owner side, you're hearing about the capital investment, the projects, and figuring out how much they're going to build. The contractors are still on site trying to put together these sets of plans and schematics and communicate with each other. The team, so a foreman trying to connect with the superintendent to their project manager, and then the teams on site communicating together, but then still the teams on site communicating with their offices. It's this beautiful orchestra that technology does help it really connects people a little bit better at the site level, because in some of the talks, I was given this topic, this term, and I think it'll land for what we're just talking about. Chad Pearson over at Plexus told me almost 8 years ago about this concept of VUCA, VUCA. That stands for volatile, uncertain, changing, and ambiguous. It was describing the United States government back in the 80s after the fall of the Soviet Union, but as he applies it, let that set for you two guys. Does that sound like the construction industry at all? Volatile with pricing, uncertain with weather and labor, changing designs. Hello? And then, wow, ambiguous. You can have a lot of fun with ambiguous in this industry, right? So technology, I think, tries to cut through that, if that makes sense, Nicholas.
Tech maybe, it's part of that volatility though, because despite our reputation as being tech laggards, that is not true in the last decade. It's certainly not true in the last 5 years, where our industry has adopted tech at an incredible rate. I'm kind of proud of that. So,
Yeah, I think just picking up on that, as opposed to a lot of other things that we do in the corporate world, right? Construction projects are almost like organisms, right? They're alive, right? You've got all kinds of different people arriving and leaving, and they're doing their piece to get the whole thing done. It's a live thing, right? And it's very dynamic, right? It's not like I show up and I analyze this for 3 months and then we're getting there and we're building today, right?
we used to use that example of, manufacturing. You've got a factory, you can do the same thing over and over again. In construction, you move the factory every time you do a project.
Yeah.
But that's not the whole story. You don't just move the factory; you change the product.
Right. And we have a thing called site conditions, right? Who else has site conditions as part of their project?
Yeah.
It's not like I come in and say, I don't like the way his office is set up. You're gonna have to do a change order, right?
Yeah, we want to do the same thing over and over again.
Right.
We're going to do it on a different surface every time.
Exactly, and it
All right,
really
well,
has an effect.
Rob, you said you're going to take the site perspective on this, and you guys move me away from this if I go too far down that line. But as I've prepared for this, I've kind of thought that Manny is the back office executive. He's the guy back at headquarters running the project, and Rob's always been the guy out on the job leading. So I don't want to peg you guys into those holes, because you both experienced both sides of that. But so if I go too far in that direction, you guys remind me that you have other experiences as well. So my next question to you, really simply, can you share an example in the last year or two, a recent example of when you saw technology immediately improve communications for a project team? Manny?
So, I was thinking about this question, and there was a bunch of different ways I was going to go, but it's pretty glaring to me over the last 3 years how AI, especially through ChatGPT, has given a lot of our folks, the ability to take their ideas and turn them into better messaging and more accurate verbiage, which they then are able to send to everyone. And it has become a lot clearer, right, what that communication is between them. And not to say that we're not good at that, and I think that's happening everywhere. But in this particular case, I'm really seeing the improvement of communications between all of the different groups, because it's just getting better, right? Being able to be clearer. And it is interesting. That plus the tools, right? And I think I just want to step back to what you were talking about, how our industry, which had been a laggard, and I think I feel like I was there on the cusp of when we made the turn, right? And we threw away the blueprints and threw all the stuff away. But I don't see any other industry that has adopted mobile technology, right, through phones and tablets faster than construction, simply because of the places where we work, right? It used to be that we used to set up a trailer, 2 computers, 2 screens, whatever it was, all gone, right? You get a 2-pound laptop, you get a phone, and I watch all of the communications through that phone, which in the old days, a lot of folks used to use that Nextel. That was great. But now the cell phone, right, has turned all of the communications, taken it out of the bounds and conscriptions, constructs of the applications, and sort of unleashed it, so that there's all of this constant communications with everyone involved in the projects, whether they're next to you or 1,000 miles away, sitting in the architect's or the engineer's office. Right? It has really unleashed that.
So yeah, so that example, proliferation of a
Yeah.
technology that replaced paper on a job for the most
Yeah.
part.
Yeah.
That's not completely recent, but that's a powerful example,
Yeah.
and also an example that we're not laggards. But
Right.
your example for communication was not so much about the speed or the delivery of the communication, but improved quality of the
Yes.
communication itself. So,
Yes.
Rob, what's your example of a tech that has immediately improved communication for a project team?
I like where you guys are going. We're trying to defend the industry a little bit, right? Because we've been termed these laggards for technology. But Nicholas, like you, I'm one of the first to stand up and rise up and say, hey, technology companies, and I work for one, so I can say this with a full straight face of how long have you honestly built technology to serve this industry that we just described? As we don't build widgets in a factory. This is not an easy industry to build technology for, because I know it drives the coders crazy when I push back and say, if it takes 5 or 10 or 100 extra lines of code, I don't care if it saves 2 clicks.
Right. It's all clicks.
You know, it's crazy. So here's the example I can share with you guys. I've been working with a gentleman up in Vancouver, Robert Clark. He works for a company called Universal Group, and they are traffic control in Canada. They came to Salus a couple of years ago, and the problem they were having is they've got 2,500 workers spread out across the country doing traffic control layouts every day. And as I got to know him, he was telling me about how they would do this process that took up to 4 or 5 hours to lay out traffic control plans, to get all the documentation on the paperwork in place just to go to work, right? 4 hours just to go to work. And so he was looking for a digital solution. And so Gabe and the team met with him and showed him a couple things. And long story short, they took a 4-hour process down to less than an hour. And then I think it's even around more like a 30-minute point right now. But as he put the digitization in place, this is the crazy thing to keep in mind. One year they had, I believe it was around 18,000, it was 17 or 18,000 paper submissions of these forms that they were getting filled out by these 2,500 workers. In 1 year, they went from 17 to 18,000 paper submissions to over 80,000 digital submissions.
Right.
Because they could do it so much faster. But why they did it, and this is what was interesting, it wasn't so much that it took them less time. What they figured out was when they put things on there, like their wiper blades were going out on the truck or the brake light or whatever mechanical issue was going on, is they were making these little notes inside this form, and the people at the shop and the office were reading it and calling them back and saying, hey, I was checking out your report, and so you need X, Y, or Z. When the field realized, you're actually reading this?
Yeah.
Huh. Okay. And, you know, it's crazy to look at the arc in that customer account and seeing that trajectory of it just skyrocketing, because in the field they start talking, going, hey, you know that new thing that we're using, and did you realize I actually read that stuff? And hey, did you get your, you know, battery taken care of, your oil change, or whatever was going on? When the humans started using it and talking to the other humans, that adoption cycle, amazing to see that kind of adoption in a company, because the field actually was getting something of value out of the technology.
Yeah, a similar example, we have a utility client also in Canada, by coincidence. Their field workers were going out taking notes on on project sites. Now that's a utility, so a project site may be a utility line of some sort. I don't want to give too much away about this customer's identity. They're pretty sensitive about that, but their field workers were going out taking notes and then coming back to hotels at night and putting those notes in. And those 3 hours every night that they were typing notes in were overtime. So you can imagine that the quality of the note is lessened when I go from scribble to having to type it, late at night after a couple beers. So by creating a field tool that would capture those notes with their voice while they're in front of the asset that they're taking notes on, it saved those 3 hours every night. They calculated that over the course of 5 years, they would save tens of millions of dollars in overtime pay just
Right.
because they capture better information on the fly. So
Right.
I'm going to ask another kind of similar question. So note the subtlety. Can you share a recent example of when an automation or a data integration immediately helped in a decision-making process? Automations or data integrations?
Yeah. I was thinking sort of through this, right? And it is interesting how I am working with a few clients now, right? And I wanted to go back to, so these several clients that I'm working with, one is actually very, very large. What we're seeing is now the second and third evolution of putting a construction management system into place, right? And we started out with sort of smaller, standalone, let me capture some RFIs and let me do some of that work, right? And it has slowly evolved into let's put the organization's philosophy and behaviors into the application and the way it functions. To now, it is no longer acceptable to be entering baseline data about a project. It all needs to be fed out of other applications, which which is now making it easier for us to make sure all the projects are in there, all the information is captured, and there's all this two-way communications going back and forth, right? And we are in that, I believe, evolution of going further and further there, right? And that is sort of what I'm seeing with my clients, is that they know they want to reduce the number of keystrokes, right?
Right.
And make the PMIS sort of the center spoke of their world, where everyone is talking back and forth between them. And then more specifically, also with a client, we were talking through reporting. And sort of, right, so now we've taken a lot of this reporting out of the applications. We're moving to Power BI. There's stuff inside, stuff outside, all working with the same data, which we now integrate. But we integrate it with the larger data sets of our business, right? So now it's no longer just the perspective of the individual project or the program, but the integration of the entire business into the reporting. And sort of now the next step from that, right, which is the complaint of, I can't get my ad hoc reports, right?
Yeah.
Where that's moved, where we're now starting to talk to customers, which is you have your reports within the application, you have your reports that are standard outside, but all of these ad hoc questions, well, that's the chatbot. So now we have to make sure that the data is clean, it's integrated, and now we can use a different interface to ask questions of our data, which are small questions, which are not captured in those standard reports, but now you've freed up those technical resources to do the larger work that you want, and you can get those smaller answers back quicker, right? To run your day-to-day decision making.
Rob, let me ask you to comment on that.
I like where you're heading with the cost thing. I'll give a little bit different example. One of the evolutions that we've watched is time cards.
Yeah.
I remember when time cards still were a little piece of paper in this little green thing next to a trailer door with that clock like Fred Flintstone that you punched in, punched out. I remember 2001 up until way in the 2000s of seeing those, right? And back then, how long did it take to work on those cost to complete? The WIP reports, all that data. I mean,
Right.
back then it was monthly, right? Then we start coming out with apps, and you could kind of get it weekly. Well, I know companies now that look at that cost to complete daily, because if you're putting in the time digitally in an app that feeds back to the accounting and or ERP, they can run those scripts daily, and you can literally see that budget being spent and allocated. But more importantly, you're looking at how much money's left.
Right.
That's huge, day to day, weekly. It's way better than monthly, when I used to sit around the table of knowing, I was a safety guy. I didn't know the accounting in detail, but I knew which projects were in trouble. And I used to watch which PMs were sitting in the hot seat trying to figure out what they're going to tell the boss about the money.
Right.
Now you know in real time, thanks to that evolution.
It's interesting you say that, because on the other side of the business, when I originally started talking about capital planning, we used to have every 3 months we would load up all the costs, right? And we went from, so that you could figure out where you were in terms of budget, long-term budgeting. But then it evolved to, by the time I left, daily updates of transactions, not only transactions that had hit, but were encumbered and were coming, which made this understanding of how much money are we spending, where we are, and what more can we do this year to advance projects, all because of better data that we were getting, especially out of the PMIS, right? Out of Kahua specifically.
Manny has used that term PMIS a couple times now. I'll define that for our audience if you're not familiar with it. Project Management Information System. Contractors and subcontractors might refer to it as a construction project management tool or construction project management system. That's what he means. Kahua fits into that category. Manny has some experience from the School Construction Authority using Kahua. So, okay, as we're talking about myths then, because I believe we have actually created a methodology now that will add value to the entire life cycle. We start with ideation and we finish with retirement, and retirement leads to the next capital plan, which is the next set of projects, which creates assets that then eventually we retire again. So we're really going full circle here. The other myth I wanted to just bring up, comment for me, if you will, on a single source of truth. Vendors like Kahua, are certainly the folks we compete with, love to talk about a single source of truth. So before I reveal all my prejudice, I'll let you guys, Rob, what do you think about when we say single source of truth?
Whose source? The owners is different than the GC. It's different than the trades. We're so far away from this amazing dream that all the data is in one place, because still, you got to think, you got three groups all intersecting on a project: the owner, the general contractor, and the trades. Everybody still got their little ace in the hole kind of tucked away, because unfortunately the litigious nature of this industry over several decades. So yeah, when we say single source of truth, like whose source are we talking about?
Well, we're talking about my source, of course.
It's a culture thing that the technology could obviously do it in so many products. This is a culture thing of still, can we all really put all our eggs in the same basket, commingle them, count them all at the same time, and nobody's hiding an egg behind their back?
Yeah. Manny, what do you think of when we talk single source of truth?
So single source of truth. So for me, it was always interesting was single source of truth wasn't a singular thing. It was whatever data set you were talking about, there was a single source of truth somewhere, right? And they owned it. But then so the idea though is to make sure that the truth exists in whoever it is that's looking at it through their pane of glass, right? And so that it used to be the single source of truth of financial data was found in the ERP system. And that, our Kahua was, well, it wasn't Kahua, the previous system was always off. But then we made decisions during integrations where there would be no difference in the form of truth between ERP and Kahua, so everybody saw the reality at the same exact time. And so it's important that the truth is in different places, that everyone can see it, and there is an owner, but that single source of truth sort of idea has to morph into truth for everyone and transparency, right?
Yeah. So you
the litigious nature of any business, right, between the contractor and the contractee, and it's natural to have that tension. It's always going to be there. But
Yeah.
we have to make sure in that source of truth that there is one set of truths that we can argue over, and that we don't all have our own truth. And that's for what we found was, the decisions we made on deployments and even in other systems, it was about, let's argue about this set of facts, not your set of facts and my set of facts.
Yeah.
Right? Like when it comes to change orders, right? You had a team working 8 hours. I think they only worked 5. So let's work that out and figure out what did that electrician team actually do during that time, and let's put in the price. We know what the price is. Let's just argue out what it actually was in terms of the amount of time and what I owe you. But don't tell me that, you think you laid this much conduit. You showed me that you laid 200 feet, not 100. We can't have those discrepancies in the way that we talk about things.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay. That's great. That's a good example of data integration, as you said.
Yeah.
Bringing truth to two sides, to the construction side from the ERP side, and likewise bringing some information to the ERP that they wouldn't have certainly as quickly. So, I think the nut of it is this, that it's good to reduce the silos of information that we have.
Yes.
I think we're all in agreement for that. But
Yes.
I just contend that there'll never be a single silo. We just want to reduce the number of them. We're going to need an ERP system because construction tools like Kahua and the folks we compete with, we're not accounting, and we don't want to be, frankly.
No, we don't.
And we're not asset management. We don't do the things that CMMS tools do that operators and maintainers need. So we need different sets of tools. But if they can communicate,
Right.
we can integrate those tools, which is we've been very successful doing. Now we can kind of have a single reporting truth, if you will, at least a reduced number of places to get your report information from. So,
Yes.
all right, if I get an amen to that, we'll move on. So,
You do.
go ahead, Manny.
Yeah, I just wanted to say another thing, and this is something that I came into the industry, into technology, when everything was siloed to the point where it was just on one box.
Yeah.
Right? This next generation of workers that's coming in, they come from a world where all data is integrated for them and they just see it all together. There's a different expectation from them. They're going to change the way that we work and the way that we see data. They don't, they see everything on that one pane of glass, and that's going to be their expectation.
Yeah.
And if things don't work like Google, they're going to be upset.
Good points. Well, we're off to a good start, but we're going to call it a wrap for episode 5, part 1. Please join us for episode 5, part 2, where we'll talk about the implications of AI, virtual reality in the field, and we'll even wave our magic wand to see what kind of applications we can come up with for the future. Thanks again. Look forward to seeing you on episode 5, part 2.